Hi, I'm Corey Driver.
I'm Gabriel Driver, and this is Moving Forward.
So this week we are in John 3, Isaiah 6, and Psalm 29. What I'd like to do with the John 3 passage, and there's lots of options, but it comes up a lot too, so you get lots of opportunities to go different ways. But I'd like to try to redeem Nicodemus. I feel like he gets judged really unfairly, frequently in our sermons and teachings, and I think he's spot on. In fact, I would say so does Jesus. The relationship between Jesus and Nicodemus is ongoing. Nicodemus is one of Jesus' followers, and crucially, when the disciples abandoned Jesus around the crucifixion, the women and Nicodemus and some of the other higher echelon followers stay with him and stay with his body, crucially. So if we're going to demonize Nicodemus, I think we're going the wrong way. So the conversation starts with a compliment. Nicodemus comes to Jesus and says, "You are a teacher who has come from God, and God is with you, and we know that because of your mighty works." This is not a doubt. This is not questioning. This is praise. And Jesus, I think, wants to challenge Nicodemus to go even further in what he already knows about Jesus rather than say, "No, you're wrong," right? And so Jesus responds not with a gentle thank you for the kind words, but with questions of his own. Jesus responded to Nicodemus's first words with the maxim, "We speak of what we know and testify to what we have seen." And that's exactly what Nicodemus has done. He has spoken of what he knows, that Jesus is a teacher sent by God, and he has testified to what he has seen. Jesus has done mighty works and signs from God. But then Nicodemus gets tripped up by Jesus' speech about being born again. Now, I get it. That's a tricky concept. And if you don't think it is, ask Christians today from multiple denominations what being born again means. If you get more than one answer, and you will, it is tricky, right? It's not an easy thing to understand, and it means according to the person and according to the denomination, and folks talk about what being born again or and again and again and again means, right? And so that Nicodemus is confused when he's encountering this concept through Jesus, I get it, right? And that's not to say what Jesus is teaching him isn't important and the truth. Of course it is. It's Jesus teaching, right? The whole point is that Nicodemus recognizes Jesus as a teacher teaching from God and what God wants people to know. So Jesus is teaching Nicodemus the truth about the necessity of being born again. But I think with a little humility and a little compassion, we could all put ourselves in the position of Nicodemus. Even if we're familiar with the concept of being born again, hearing Jesus talk about it has to be a little bit unsettling. But even after a discussion of being born again, Jesus says, essentially, "Nicodemus, you're right. God did send me. I am from God, and God is with me. And I am going to be lifted up and provide salvation to the world." That's where Jesus is going. But where has Jesus come from? Now we turn to the other readings. Jesus says that no one has gone up to heaven except for the one who has come from heaven, but God has given other people, prophets and the like, visions of heaven. And Isaiah 6 is one such place. And Isaiah gets this vision of the heavenly throne room where God's garments are filling the heavenly temple, and these flying, flaming snakes with multiple appendages are shouting praises and loud voices are shaking the heavenly temple. And I don't think that's an engineering problem. I think just the praise of God and the presence of God is incredibly powerful. And so you get this otherworldly picture of heaven. And that's where Jesus has been hanging out for millennia, right? Before the incarnation, before the advent of the Messiah in the human plane, Jesus has been in this heavenly throne room that reverberates with God's praise. And then Psalm 29 deepens the picture and points to how God is enthroned over the waters. And this is like a victory position. Remember, in ancient Near Eastern cosmologies, the flood or the flood dragon or the water is like the force of chaos in the world. And there's lots of psalms that point to this understanding, even in Hebrew religious thought, that like the water is dangerous, right? And you get this from the disciples too, right? Like their encounters with the sea are scary a lot of times. And Jesus demonstrating power over the sea is the force of God conquering the force of chaos as embodied by the waters. And so God's throne is established on top of the sea, right? Think about the creative work in Genesis is taking these waters, right? Like the pre-existence water. Where does the water come from in Genesis 1? We don't know. That's before the story, right? Like God doesn't create the waters. They just are in the text, right? There's fun speculation about what's before Genesis 1, but that's not the point. The point is that God makes out of the water and separates land from water. And when creation is unsustainable because every thought of humans is evil all the time, God allows the water in the flood to start over creation, to say like, all right, I'm no longer controlling the chaos water. And so the rains from the sky and the fountains of the deep can mingle once again, and creation is wiped out. And then God says, I will never do that again. And I'm setting up this rainbow as a reminder to me, a sign for myself that I will not allow watery chaos again. And so the psalmist is praising God that God's throne is established above the flood, above the waters, to say God has all this control over nature and in heaven. And that's the heaven that Jesus comes from, that throne room that demonstrates power and holiness, such that the building shakes, such that the weirdo angel creatures are shouting praises at all times. And it's so loud and crazy that Isaiah is like, I'm not even sure what's going on here. And mystics will try to enter this scene for thousands of years afterwards, because like the throne room of God is the thing. And so we return to Nicodemus. Jesus has come from God. Jesus was in that throne room for lifetimes and lifetimes on human existence before being incarnated as a baby and growing up. And I think Jesus learns, right? The text is clear about that, and grows in wisdom and maturity. But I have to think that Jesus also remembers, right? Jesus remembers the experience of being in that throne room. And Jesus is looking forward to it again, sitting down at the right hand of God, right? And so that's where Jesus is coming from. That's where Jesus is ultimately going to through the cross and resurrection and ascension. And so I think Nicodemus gets it in a way that, speaking personally, I wish I would, right? He knows, he testifies to what he has seen, that Jesus came from God as a teacher and that God is with him. Truer words than Nicodemus even imagined, I'm sure. So this week, go however you want, but let's be kind to Nicodemus because I think he gets it. Jesus has come from God. Jesus is returning to God. And thanks be to God.